Ooh, welcome, everybody. It's good to see everyone, or at least you can hear me and I can see you're logged in. Um, if you're new to webinars, or as a reminder, you can chat in the chat box. That will show to everybody. That's just for general chat. But if you have a question, you can type that in the questions box. We're going to do questions and answers at the end of the session. So feel free to type your questions as they come up, and I'll go through them at the end. Your microphones are muted. So you won't be able to speak directly. If you have a question that I can't quite get from the text question, I'll unmute you at that time. So if you have a mic connected, but we'll take care of that as time comes. All righty, I think that's everybody. Let's jump right into it. So as you guys know, you have upgraded already to V10. Thank you for that. I hope you're having fun with it. It's a really nice update. I'm very excited for it. And we'll start, today we're going to be talking about the enhancements to the interface, the shortcuts, all those fun things that are going to make your workflow faster, easier, smarter. So as you've already seen, when you load up 3Design, that terrible 4 seconds it takes now to load, you're going to get to the welcome screen, or the root screen. Just like before, there's been some slight changes to this. Most notably, you'll notice that we no longer have the shortcuts to starting with a sketch or a 3-shaper model. Based on feedback, nobody was really using those. I never used them. Typically, you need a part in your design at some point anyway, so I always start with a part and then add my sketches and models to that as needed. So no one was really using it. It added clutter and confusion to the root screen, so those are gone. But there is the new welcome button. Hopefully you've got a chance to explore that. Keep in mind that page will be updated as we add stuff to it, so check back on it every once in a while. You'll see some new things in there. But otherwise, I'll just click on part here. Just a quick reminder, the About screen is located in the 3Design logo menu, the main menu, under About. And you will find your license information, your software version, and a quick snapshot of your system. So this is all helpful information for you, as well as if you're calling into support, we may ask, what version, what system you have, things like that. And really notably is, again, making sure your graphics card, 3Design still requires a high-end graphics card, and it should show here instead of, it might say AMD graphics without an actual card that's built in, or it might say Intel graphics or Iris Pro graphics, something like that. Those are all graphics that are coming from your main CPU, and 3Design will run like that. It just doesn't run very well. You'll have a lot of slowdown, crashes, bugs, things like that. So this is still the same information, but just wanted to remind you of that About screen. Okay, so talking about scaling, especially for those of you with 4K screens, when working on a 4K screen, typically you want some scaling in the operating system. So this is my 4K screen here, and you see I have my scale set to 150%. So that's so my icons and things on my desktop and other programs, I can actually see them. They're not tiny, tiny little things. So with 3Design V10, we decided to turn that off for just the program. So you no longer have to go back to 100% scaling to get the program to scale properly. The scaling's all done within the program, separate from whatever settings you have in the operating system. So if you do have issues with the scaling, there are some overrides we could do. That would be done through the support desk. So just call into the support desk and if you have any issues with the scaling, but that should be fixed now through you can keep your scaling on your 4K screens is the 150, which is the recommended for most people, and still run the program at the right scale. Okay. Another noticeable change, or you may not have noticed yet, but as you know, when you click on a module like Sketch, for example, it adds a sketch to the tree and you're entering the sketch module. And typically you want to use the back button to exit your sketch. Sometimes you accidentally click here and go to part, for example. So you now get this warning, do you actually want to create a new part? So this is very helpful because as you click these module buttons, you're adding new items to the tree. So we have this nice little warning here that's going to help out avoid that confusion of switching parts for you. So you can just hit no there. That's going to remind you to use that exit button to switch between. You can also switch between the modules you've already added from the tree by double clicking. That part's the same, it's just a new message. Let's talk about changes to the 3D viewer settings. There's a few things in here now. You'll want to go through these now that you've installed. That's in the view menu for the main menu, 3D viewer settings. Okay. So we still have the same 4 options for your high-end display. These are all on by default when you install now. And if not, you can make sure they're all checked. Just to go through these again, if you're not aware, the vertex buffer object mode, very technical stuff here, but that's basically what is pushing the graphics rendering, the viewport rendering, all to your graphics card. That frees up more space, more processing for your CPU. So that one's always on and should be on if you have a GPU, which is required. Anti-aliasing is what smooths out the pixels on the screen so that the edge of your objects don't look all jaggedy and pixelated. The new option in there is you can now set the sample size. So the higher the number, the smoother it's going to be. Now this is dependent on your graphics card. So we have a lot of new higher end graphics cards, big gaming cards out there now. If you have those, you can go much higher. The only way to really test this is to try out higher numbers and then see how it runs. If it's after you change it to a higher number and your viewport is really slow and jagged when you're moving and rotating things around, getting some lag, maybe you've set that a little too high. I have a Quadro card. Mine runs pretty comfortably at 16. That's going to be the case for most higher end cards. Everything else is usually 8. You have a really fancy, like a new RTX 3000 series, you might even bump it up to 32. It's a pretty subtle difference between those, but it does look really nice with that smoothing. So I'm gonna leave mine at 16. In the second tab, you'll notice that in V10, we have turned these off by default. So in V9, they were on by default, and you would have to turn them off if you didn't want them. And most people, myself included, these are really nice effects, but they are distracting and they add a lot of GPU usage so they can slow things down on systems. So, so we turned them off by default, and you can turn them on still just in this second tab. The nice thing about this tab is you don't have to exit the program for these effects to go on and off. So I usually turn them on if I'm showing the program to someone, if I'm sitting down with a client and want to show them the fully rendered out objects, and then just turn it off when I'm done with it. The logo is no longer on the viewport, so it's no longer in the middle of the screen and you don't have to move it to the bottom. It's now up here next to the menu at the top, so it's permanently there. You don't have to worry about moving that around anymore. But those are off by default now. And you can see I'm not pushing my graphics card as heavy. In the third tab, the rest of the options, the only change, or a couple changes in here, the zoom to cursor position is now default to on, just from user request for that zoom option. We get a lot of those. So we decided to turn it on so people would know that that is an option available. I know most of you are probably using the old way of, or the normal way of doing it, which is when you zoom in and out, it zooms to the 0, to the center. And this one you can turn on and off at will too, but this will zoom to wherever you're pointing on the screen instead of to the center. So I've been using the old way for so long, I still turn that back off. But if you have noticed that the zoom is different, that's why you can turn that off there. And the other thing you're going to see in here is the new HDR settings for the maps or the image that's on your objects. So this is the new default. You can change the material map here. That's the town scene blurred. So this is the town scene that we're used to in older versions. The new blur version kind of adds a blur filter to that, so it looks a little less mirror-like, less distracting. a little more realistic. So that is the default. And then we've set up a few other options in here that you can play around with, just so you have some choices. If you want even less detail, I think the foreseen blur is nice. And there's sunny weather. I don't think there's a blurred version of that. I'm not sure why. I do like the town scene blurred. And there's also one for your stones as well. And the default is the new dark matter image that we put in there. If you want the old town scene, find that the town scene looks better on metals, but not as good on stones. So now you have them as separate images, so you can change them differently. So you have all of the ones that you have for metals, including blurry ones, as well as the new dark matter. So far, that's my favorite one. The other nice thing, it's not in there yet, but we will have a folder in the user folder where you can actually put HDR images, and they will show up here, so you can put those onto your objects as well. So hopefully that'll be in the next update, but we'll see. We'll also have to do some training and create some tutorials on how to create those images, because you need to first take a 360 image. Most of your iPhones and Android phones can do the nice 360 panorama images now. So you take one of those, and then you use a program online where you can turn those into a cube map and put your own images in there, so you can have a little fun with it. Or we can just leave the defaults. It's up to you. That should be it for the 3D viewer options. So some of those changes do require a restart of the program, anything on that first tab. So I'll do that in a moment, but let's go through the F12 options next before we do that. So F12 options, still using the F12 key or from the tools menu. And of course, we've got the new text and fonts in here. It's much cleaner, easier to see everything, and it doesn't bug out anymore when you open it. So you don't have to worry about the resetting it, like closing and opening it multiple times like we used to. So that's nice. So everything in the general tab is mostly the same. This is where you change your weight and your currency. And then the other option, which is on by default, is enable multi-threading. So that's the big key to why 3DESIGN 10 is so much faster. We now have, the developers have gone through every line of code, rewritten everything, and it's now taking advantage of your CPU even more with the multiple threads, hyper-threading and things like that. So much, much faster, and that's less errors on things like Booleans and stuff like that. So that should be on. And no one has a single thread processor anymore, I would imagine. So that's definitely should be on. Nothing to change in there. Under display, you can still change your display accuracy. That's going to make it look a little smoother as well. You don't have those on round objects. You have that kind of faceted look. That was just from the display being set lower. It's not really changing the model at all. But most GPUs can run that at top quality, so you can set that higher usually. Again, if it's slowing down your system, go back down to high. And then you can change your scale. So this is where you can scale things, since we're using the not using the window scaling. We've created new icons, the new SVG graphics icons. Those are scalable vector graphics. The big reason why we had to change them, plus we wanted to modernize it, make it a little cleaner. It's going to take a little getting used to the new icons. It's taken me some time, but now that I'm used to it, I go back to the other version and I'm lost there. So just like changes in earlier versions, it just takes a minute to get used to it. But the nice thing is you can now scale these to any size you like, and because they're vector based, they won't be blurry when you scale them up. So you can have a 8K screen and still be able to see your icons. The size of the text, that's all the text in your tree and your dialog boxes, everything on the screen, that could be scaled as well. And that's small, medium, and large. So I go with the second setting for my icons for now, and the medium. You can play around with those. Those don't show until after a restart, so you have to kind of test them out and then restart the program. Axes and planes, the only change here is you can now turn off the name of the planes in the graphical view. So if you don't want to see the plane names down there, you can turn that off. Not sure, I guess somebody asked for it, so put it in there. Miscellaneous. These options are all the same. I will tell you in V10, you want to use the simplified tree if you're going to be using super actions. Super actions do not work if your sketches are separated into folders. So they're still working on that. Hopefully they'll find some workaround, but yeah, the problem is you can't link your sketches in those super actions properly if they're not in the part with the part you're creating. So I know in the past I've always had people turn that off. We like the organized tree, so that might take a little getting used to. If you're not going to use super actions, I suppose you can turn that off, but make sure that simplified tree stays on for now. Everything else is still the same in here. Some recommendations. Don't forget to change your number of decimals to 3 if you want higher accuracy for especially exports. And toolbar compact mode is now off by default. So when you reinstall or you install a new version, you don't have to remember to go turn that off. That's where some of your tools are hidden underneath other tools. So it stacks like tools on top of each other. It's great if you know all of the icons, you know where all the tools are, and you want to save some space on the screen. But now that's off by default. So you have to turn that on if you want the toolbar compact mode. And then a new option in here is select only items that are entirely in the selection rectangle and part. So we have the new marquee selection rectangle in the part mode, and this is where you can tell it whether you want it to only select things that are completely inside the rectangle as opposed to just touching the rectangle. So we'll talk about that selection mode when we get to that section here in a bit. Sketch mode, new options in here is keep camera orientation when exiting sketch module. So this one is off by default, and that's the way we're used to it in earlier versions. And what that means is when I am sketching, let me say, for example, I have a little stone here and I want to sketch some prongs or claws next to it. Okay, so normally when you exit the sketch, you go back to the same camera orientation you were in before you click the sketch button. So back zoomed out or wherever I was at. With that new option, keep camera orientation. I'm working on my sketch here. When I exit the sketch, it's going to leave the camera right where I was working. So I find that's very useful. I don't have to, zoom back into where my sketch was. I know exactly where that curve that I was just drawing. It's up to you which option you want to use. I believe it's off by default, so you can turn that on in the F12 under sketch. Okay. And then the scaling for your sketch is in the sketch section. So just like the icons and the text, you can change your point sizes as well as your curve sizes. So I'm happy with the medium, but if I had a bit higher resolution, I might go larger. If you're using a lower resolution, you might go smaller, but again, that's up to you. You can choose whatever's comfortable for you. And the same thing with Reshaper. This is a new section added here where you have where you can change the scaling of your vertexes and edges in that mode. And that one, I do go a little larger, but that's because I'm usually showing it on screen. So that is the new options in F12. Make sure you go through those. Try out the new things in there. Okay. Next up, I want to talk about the library. So some enhancements to the library. The first thing you'll notice with the library is we've added this little tab. And no matter where I go to click on the library down there, that little tab pops up. So I can quickly pop open the library by just clicking that little tab. Same thing for closing it, much easier than trying to grab that. You can still grab the bar or the tab itself if you want to resize the library as you open it. They've made the bar much wider too, so that shouldn't get stuck at the bottom of the screen anymore, especially on the Mac side. So nice little tab to pop it open and close. Okay, the first thing you'll notice different in the library is they've added the symbol or the folder structure within the display here in the previews. So you don't have to go through the index. You can jump through the folders and find your things that way. And there are navigation buttons, so you can quickly go back up folder levels. Okay. So your default symbols are still, your samples and things like that are still going to be in the top level in that symbols folder. So if you're at the very top level, click on symbols, and then you'll find the rest of your folders, and then the samples, and then anything you add to the library that you don't put into a custom folder will be in this section here. So you can see I have a couple things down here. Okay. The library is now searchable. So if we're looking for anything that I have with flower in the name will pop up here. And you can see that includes folders as well as items themselves. There you go. Got to be in the symbols folder for them to show. I went back too far. The reset button is still here, and that does refresh the library. I've found that most of the time the library is refreshing on its own now, but whenever you want to refresh your search, or if you do add something to the library and made any changes and it doesn't update, just hit that refresh button. Okay. Over in the top right corner, you have a new icon size or new scale option here for your library as well. So again, on your different resolution screens, if you need to make these larger, they scale really large. Or you can make them very tiny if you need to fit more on the screen. Again, up to you. Those changes can be made live there inside the library. Okay. And then finally, right-clicking. There's a couple things in there. If you right-click an item, you have add to favorite option. So that's going to mark it with a little star, and it's going to add a favorites folder to the top level of your library. So you can find that in the very top level under symbols, go to favorites. Anything that you've marked will show up there. So you can create a folder of your favorite things and add or remove those as needed so you can find them quickly. And the other thing we can do is rename. And I believe this is still bugged. Yeah. So soon you will be able to rename your items directly here. That's been reported for the 0.01 release, which should be hopefully very soon. Definitely a couple of little bugs. We haven't found any major breaking bugs that stop you from being able to work. I have workarounds for all those. We'll go over those at the end here. But that rename should be coming soon. And that should be it for the library. Okay, so let's talk about repeatable actions. There's a ton of new ways to be able to repeat actions and do things much quicker. When you have to do anything tedious where you're doing the same steps over and over and over. Let me draw out a few shapes here. Okay, so for an example, I need to extrude these, and I have some choices. I can select them all and extrude them. Now, of course, if I do it that way, it's going to be a single object. Even though there are gaps between them, this is still considered one object, one piece. So the only way to separate those would I'd have to go in and extract them using the extract elements button, which will then group them and then ungroup them, which is going to create the folder of ungrouped objects, elements in my tree. It gets a little messy. So it's usually best to do those one at a time. And obviously that's going to be a few more steps and a little more tedious. So I know I'm going to do all these at 3 millimeters, for example. And I can choose the direction, which side, et cetera, both sides. And then I'd have to do that for each one. Now, most of our tools have this keep last field values as default. So whatever I have typed in here, except for the curve, of course, is going to save. So when I go to do another extrusion, I grab the circle, and you can see that those settings are still in there. So a bit faster. Now, another way we can make that even faster, instead of having to select the curve and go over here and grab the tool and so on, is to just select the curve in the edit menu. You have a new option called repeat last edited. So no matter what I did last, it's going to repeat that tool. It's going to reopen the tool. I can make changes, or because I kept my last values, if it's the same that I used on the last one, I can just simply validate it. Okay, now let's make it even faster. Instead of having to go to the menu every time and do that repeat last edited, I'm going to set up a keyboard shortcut. So this one does not have a default, but you can set it. Anything that you have a menu item for, you should be able to set a keyboard shortcut. So I've changed mine to insert. You can see that is shown next to the item in the tree, even my custom ones. If I go to Tools, Customize, find the menu that item is in, that's in the Edit menu, and click right here for shortcut. Whatever I type in is going to be my new shortcut. I hit space, for example, we have a new option in there that's going to warn me. You've already used space. Space is already assigned to show, hide, freeze. You want to change the assignment. So if you want to override the defaults, you can, but the nice thing is you can cancel out of that. So you don't have to worry about messing up any of the other shortcuts or any shortcuts you've already set. So my keyboard, I have an extended keyboard, so it does have an insert key that's not used for anything else. So I like to use that for my repeat, but you can set that to anything you want. You can do Shift R, you can do Alt something. It's really up to you how you organize those. Okay. And you can see here, recompute was added in V9. I added that as the end key, which is near my insert and delete keys. So that's where I set my shortcuts. So the insert's already in there. Okay, so with that keyboard shortcut set up, I don't have to go to the menu to repeat that last step. Now I just select my curve, hit my insert key, hit enter, done. So I can quickly repeat those steps. So that's not all. We've added so many places you can do these repeating actions. So they fit into your workflow the way you like. So let's do that extrusion. I select the curve and just right click directly in the viewport somewhere. We have repeat last edited, and it's going to give me my extrusion, but it's also going to give me the last 5 things I did. So it's remembering 5 different tools that I've used recently. So I don't have any other ones in here that works with a curve, but you can just select that from the menu and repeat it. So if I'm doing extrusions and then Booleans and I want to do those in order, I can do, repeat my extrusion and then select the other 2 objects, repeat my Boolean, whatever steps, up to 5, it's going to remember those. So great little option there as well. Okay. Show you one more example of repeating. Let's go with green. Okay, so for example, I want to make some planes. I'm going to be placing some objects or stones or whatever on here, and I want to link those planes to my ring so it's more parametric. So select my object. I'm just going to do a plane on object and tell it where I want that to be. So I have my favorite kind of way of doing planes. I like to make them a little smaller so I don't mix them up with the other planes, the default planes. And I'm going to go ahead and fix that orientation. And then the reason I wanted to show this example is in the plane tools now, you have an option for choosing the color of the plane. So if you use a lot of these little planes, these little custom planes, you can add some color to them and adjust its transparency. Okay. Now again, if I keep my last field values, I want to do some more planes, I can make that really quick by just hitting my insert key, choosing where it goes. I'm going to flip the orientation here. Since it's on the other side, 270, one of those. Maybe put a different color on it. And really quickly add those and organize it that way. Okay. So those are your repeatable actions. Remember, there are multiple ways to do that. You can just click the tool itself to repeat it. If you remember to save those options when you started that tool, you can use the edit menu, repeat last edited option. If you set that keyboard shortcut, even better, because you can just click a keyboard shortcut. Or you can use right click and find the last 5 edited. Now I want to talk about twin copy. So twin copy has finally been changed a little bit because it's never been any different than just using the clone tool. So I never saw any advantage to it. So when you create something and you want to copy it in the old versions, you could use the clone. And the nice thing about the clone is it has a move tool built in, a manipulator built in, so you can move it as you're cloning it if you want, or you can just validate it in the same spot. So that is a clone. A clone is a history copy of the item I created. So previously, if you right-clicked your object and created a twin copy, it would create a clone without being able to move it. So it wasn't doing anything special. So we were like, well, let's make the twin copy a little more useful. So twin copy just allows me to create a copy of something from my tree without having to, recreate something new or find it over in the tools. And I can change its settings. I can use the default values if it's a tool that has those, and get my clone that way, or my twin copy. So now there's a difference between clones and twins. And I think of it this way: a clone is an exact replica of something. If you think of an actual clone, it's got the same DNA, the same history, it's exactly the same. Twins can be identical or fraternal. So they don't have to be the same object, and they will have different histories. So my twin copy of my torus, I can now change the original. It will affect the clone, but not the twin copy. So you can separate those histories that way. So what's the difference between that and just using my repeatable actions? Well, the difference is not every tool has that option for keeping your last values. Anything that's surface-based will not have those options, things like that. So you can use the twin copy for those items instead. And it just gives you another way to work with twins and clones. So that's the difference there. Okay. Another enhancement we have is, this is a highly requested feature, and that is saving viewports, especially for those who like to do a lot of screenshots, and you may want to have your screenshots in a specific camera orientation and not using just the defaults. So let me throw an item on the screen here that we can look at. Okay, so I want to take some screenshots, and I want to do kind of a top-down angled view for all my screenshots. So we can now save those views. And I'm just going to right-click anywhere in the viewport, not on an object, and under the new or the enhanced orientation menu, it's where you have your default views. That's control 1 through 6. We have our custom orientations. So you can load and save 3 different orientations. So I like this view. I'm going to load that into orientation number 1. Oh, sorry, wrong way. I need to save it before I load it. That was the last time I did that. We're going to save orientation number 1. So now I can quickly do that for some other views. I'm going to do save number 2 and save number 3. The other example where I use this is if I'm working on a certain section of the ring and I want to get back to that area quickly. So before I would have to, as I'm moving things around, I'd have to hit the home button, I'd have to zoom, re-rotate, pan, get back to it. So now I can save that temporarily to one of those 3 slots and get right back to it. So a couple different ways that's going to help your workflow. Now, that menu, you do have to go in here and find the number that you want and load it. So again, let's make that even easier. Let's put those in shortcuts. Customize, because it is in the view menu, we can find that here. Load and save 1, 2, and 3. Open this up a little wider for you. Okay, and you can see here, I set mine to shift 1, 2, and 3. Since I use control 1, 2, and 3 for top, front, and side, I use shift for my custom. Okay, so I did shift and alt for my options, but again, that's up to you. But I like that. I do alt to save and shift to load. So with my shortcuts, I can quickly go shift 1 for that one, shift 2 for that one, shift 3 for that one. If I want to change one, I can go alt 1, and now shift 1 will bring me back to that spot. So that is the new custom orientations, and you can find those in the right-click menu under orientation. I believe in the view menu as well. Yes, under orientation. Either way. Okay, so speaking of orientations, let's talk about global versus local orientation. So up until now, in all previous 9 versions, we've only ever used global orientation in 3Design itself. If you've gotten really deep into 3Shaper, you may have played around with the different axis systems in there. But we've made it pretty simple to use in the 3Design side of things. I'm going to throw a ring in here again. So let's say, for example, I want to place a plane on here. I'll use my plane on object. Okay, and again, I've got my defaults from the last time I used it, so that's ready to go. And I'm going to use a stone inside that plane. I didn't center that, that's okay. Okay. And then I'm going to do some sort of settings or some sort of design around that stone, so I need to sketch in that. So I might do a plane from my other plane. This one's linked to my ring. I want to link this in the other direction. So we'll do a new plane based on the one I have selected. And I want to make that orthogonal and not turn it. Did I not change my orientation? That's okay, it'll still work from here. Okay, so this is pretty common. You set up a 2 or maybe even a 3 plane system on an object as opposed to using your defaults, which, as we know, don't change. They're always only linked to 0. So I want to work on this stone here. And if I add a move, rotate, scale to that stone, for example, notice that my manipulator here is based on the global axis system, the compass system. So my Z goes up and down. That makes it really difficult if I want to move this along a plane that I've created. So instead, what I'm going to do is right click on this plane here. That's the one I'm going to use where I'm moving it along that plane. And we're going to go to normal to. So normal to has always been there, but what they've done is change normal to so that it flips over to that plane. And notice that my tool is now linked to that direction. My compass is changed to match and everything. So if I add my move, rotate, scale, oops, it's going to give me a hard time this time. Let's see. Normal to. Oh, there we go. Am I using the right version here? Sorry. Last demo, it worked fine. It is changing the axis here. There is a new option in the Move, Rotate, Scale tool where you can activate the alternate reference system. But that does also affect, let's see. Okay, yeah, it is working. Okay. I'm just looking at it sideways. So you can see here my compass, my Z is now pointing, even if I turn the screen, my Z is now pointing the direction of this plane. So any of my tools that use X, Y, and Z are going to be affected. Now, simply to go back to global, all you have to do is hit the home key. Okay, so you can see that resets the compass axis system back to what we're used to, at the same time as setting the screen back to that home position. Okay, so that is the new local axis system. There's a couple ways that works. It works with changing the compass directions to match the plane that you click normal to on. And also we'll talk about that move, rotate, scale manipulator a little bit later, but you can now change the reference plane that you're working from in that as well. Okay, speaking of axis and plane selections, we have some new options there. So for most tools that have the plane or axis selection, right here I have the reference plane, and we know we can normally use the hand and open up the folder and click it from there, or if you have it on the screen. But right next to that little drop-down menu, you can quickly change your planes right there inside the tool. So, I know that's a highly requested feature that's finally been added. Hopefully in the future, I'd like to be able to see custom planes automatically added to this list. This is just for the defaults currently, but it's a step in the right direction. Okay, that does work with axes. And speaking of axes, let me show you another new little shortcut. Let's say I'm creating my little eternity band. I want to circular duplicate these. And the normal way would be to select the item, select circular duplicate, come over here and choose an axis. That works on the compass from the tree, or I can just use the new drop-down menu. But a quick shortcut. Right-click on the axis that I want to revolve around first, and you'll see suggested tools, circular duplication. So we may add more to that shortcut menu, but those are the three common ones that you would want to pick an axis before you launch the tool. If you want a shortcut, that would be circular duplication, move, rotate, scale, and revolve. If you do the move, rotate, scale, that's going to set your rotation to that axis automatically. You don't have to switch the modes in the tool. Okay, so you'll find those in the actual axes. I don't think it works from, yeah, it works from your folder as well. Okay. Those suggested actions are on a lot of things, especially stones. Those were introduced in V9. They've just expanded those for the axis recommendations now. Okay. So as you've seen so far, that right-click menu is the key to a lot of these workflow shortcuts. Definitely play around and discover those. Okay, shifting gear a little bit here, let's talk about topology. Topology, what is that? That is just a way of displaying our 3D objects so that we can see more information about them. The topology of the object is its surfaces and edges in this case. And let me find an item again. Oh, now let's use that one. Okay, real quick, I'm going to filter this so I can select them. So first we'll filter by to get the stones and metals separate, then I'll ungroup. So I have some different objects to display here for you. Okay, so for topology, a lot of times it's very helpful to look at the actual faces and edges of your item. And you could be doing that for analysis reasons. As we know, certain times Booleans will fail because we ended up getting two edges on top of each other. And the only way to really check that in previous versions would be to find a tool that shows the topology. That would be things like the fillet tool. I like the copy faces just because I can always find it really easy. And that will calculate and display its edges and faces. Problem with this is I can only view that while the tool is open, so I can't look at the other topology of the other item to see, you know, how they're going to interact there. So now you can right click and there is an option on the item itself. If you right click topology display, you can toggle that on and off. And it will calculate and show its topology. You can also color code them. So if you right click and set a different color, alternate color. So you can also use this as a new way to organize your visually organize your files as well. And we can do that separately for each object. And even set different colors. So now I can view the topology and make sure, you know, if I'm getting Boolean issues, I can quickly see maybe it's some edges that are not lined up. This has been moved around. And things like that. Okay, now you can set the topology display, toggle it on and off for every object in the scene. You would do that from the view menu. And that's toggle topology display for all objects. Now this can take some time to calculate, especially if you have a ton of stones. This one's not too bad, so it's pretty quick because it does have to calculate those faces to be able to display them. Now once it's changed and loaded, everything's smooth and fast. It's just while it calculates, it takes a little time. So keep that in mind if you're toggling it on and off. But yeah, it's a quick way if you want to look at all of your objects. And this is in the menu, so if you want to set a keyboard shortcut, you can do that as well. Okay. And then if you want to clear all of the topology displays, unchecking that will clear them all, even if you've set separate colors and things like that. Okay. So that is the new display mode. Let's talk about the new selection mode. So we know the previous way to select things. Oops. In 3DESIGN anyway, is to use your control. And you can add to your selection, or you can remove from your selection. So same way we've been doing it for years. Don't forget shift works as well, but you want to use shift only when you're selecting from a list. So if I want to select element 6 here all the way through 23, it's going to select, if I hold shift, everything in between those two. You want to be careful doing that on the screen instead of holding control, because I could be selecting who knows what inside the list between there. So control directly, shift if you want to do a list of objects quickly from the list in the tree. So that hasn't changed, that's all the same. But now we have the new marquee selection. So quickly draw a marquee, and I have it set so that it's anything the item touches currently is going to be included. So that included the ring as well. So you might use, control to remove from the selection and still be able to quickly grab those. If you set that to only selecting inside, I think that's more comfortable for some people. It will only select what's inside the rectangle. Okay. The one thing you do want to be careful with currently is planes will also be included in your selection if you go over the middle of them. So your axes are generally frozen, so that's nice, but be careful. You might be selecting planes as well. So I've put in a request to see if that can be removed from the selection. I'm not sure because they are objects, so we'll see. But the more useful selection tool, well, that's very useful, but the one I really love is the new paint selection. So this one works simply by holding the P key down on my keyboard. And as I run my mouse over the objects, it adds it to the selection. I don't need to click. Don't save in the middle. There we go. You don't have to click anything on the mouse. You just hold down the P on your keyboard, run that over everything, and it automatically paints in the selection. Makes your selection really quick and easy. Again, it may include things that you run over that you don't want. Just let go of the P key, and then you can always use control to remove those from the selection, just like you did before. Okay, now what about deselecting? That's always been not very easy in 3DESIGN. You had to select something that was already selected to deselect everything. And you can still do that. But if you've got things hidden and you're not sure, you don't want to accidentally include that in your selection. You just want to make sure that nothing is selected. So in 3Shaper, you can just click anywhere in the viewport. Unfortunately, we can't do that here, different engine. But we've added to the root. You always have the root at the top of the tree. Select there. That makes sure that only the root item is selected, which is empty. That will deselect everything else in your scene. So that's really helpful if you're going into 3Shaper and you don't want to accidentally import something. You might have something selected or some curves or planes selected. I like to just hit that little root button and then start whatever. Or if I'm starting a new tool and I want to be sure nothing's selected, especially once your trees get really long and hard to see everything at once, don't forget to just click that root. Also, don't forget if you double click the root, that will take you back to the root screen. That's that home screen with the buttons, with the welcome screen and everything. But just single click it. Okay, so that is deselect. Speaking of the tree, this is pretty self-explanatory. You see a new box at the top of the tree, and that is our search. You can now search within the tree. Why is my keyboard not working all of a sudden? Well, we'll just do a number. So I'm looking for element 12. Now, if you're renaming your objects, obviously this is going to be a more useful tool. And as your tree gets larger, it's going to find that object and select it for you. So I'm not sure what, I think all I have is elements in here, so it's really hard to find one. So yeah, I'll just do by number. So if I'm looking for number 17, it's going to move the tree to that area and highlight it for me. Oh, there it is. So pretty simple to use. That's the new search feature in the tree. All right, now let's go talk about the new manipulators. So there are two tools that we've added the new manipulators to, and the main one is going to be your move, rotate, scale. I'm sure you've already discovered this, but let me go through the details for you. Okay, so this is the new manipulator, the new gizmo for the move, rotate, scale tool. And we've added move, rotate, scale options all in one manipulator. So you don't have to switch between the move manipulator, the rotate manipulator, and the scale manipulator back and forth. You can do that all from one spot. So the move is still grabbing the arrows, so the tips of the arrows. And the first thing you'll notice is you now have a nice big display of how far you're moving it. You can also see the original position that you're moving it from and the direction, and it's all color coded. So lots of visual information, making moving things without having to go and type them in exactly much easier. Now I have my accuracy set to 0.00 or 3 decimal places, so 000. So it's a very fine movement. So getting it lined up, if I wanted to get it exactly 7.5, for example, that's still pretty difficult to do. But over here, new option is to change the step. I want to go in 0.0 or just 0.1 millimeter increments. So if I set that, I can now move it exactly 0.1 millimeters at a time, making it much easier to just visually move it to where I want it to be. Okay. So that is the move portion. Rotate, again, I can just grab the rotation handles here and start rotating it. It'll switch the tabs automatically so I can see the values in the properties over there, but I can also clearly see that color-coded there on the screen, which angle I'm rotating in then. You still have the axis and object object options. Remember, those will lock you out of the other manipulators. So when you use those, for example, you're using it to go around a specific axis or an axis in another object or within the object itself. Those still work the same, and they will still lock you out of the other movements and scales. Okay. There is a new reset button, so you can quickly go back to where you were. If you over-rotate something, you don't have to click the little buttons and reset the angles and type in 0 anymore. Just reset it from here within the tool. Oh, one more thing, back to the move. We still have the little squares in the middle of the manipulators so that you can move it in 2 axes at the same time. So this little square would be Z and red. But to make it so it's less confusing and difficult, when you're in a 3D view like this, if I grab that on accident and move it, along the x-axis, I am actually moving it along the Z at the same time. So I might be moving it up when I don't want to. So most of the time when we use these little boxes is when we're in a flat view. So you flatten your view first, you can simply use those boxes without having to worry about accidentally doing that in the 3D mode. And it also displays the distance for both directions. Yeah, I think that's everything for rotate. Rotate has steps as well. So if you want to go in a degree increment, I want to do 15 degrees. It will lock that. So you can set those. Okay. And then finally, scale. The scale has been added in here as the little squares on each axis. And you can simply start doing a non-uniform scale directly right there with the manipulator. No longer have to go into that scale tab, turn off the ratio first, and then get the other tool to do this kind of scaling. Okay, so the cool thing is it does show you these little gray dots that shows the original size. So if you're just visually sizing something, you know how much bigger it or smaller that you're scaling it to. You can quickly do all 3 directions and how much we're changing them. And if you want to go back to a uniform scale, that's with the ratio checked, you can turn the ratio back on over here, or you just grab these little white arrows and it does all 3 scales at the same time. Okay. And that, of course, does have a step option as well if you want to fine tune that to a specific millimeter or percentage. So that is the new move, rate, rotate, scale manipulator tools. The other tool we've added that to, which makes this tool so much more useful, it's a tool I use, but not as often because it's a little bit tedious. That's the lay on object tool. So let me start with, I'm going to do a little torus here. And I'll use the new move, rotate, scale to just quickly shape it into that. So much faster. And let's say I'm going to take a little sphere and I want to keep that centered. And I want to lay that onto the surface of this object. So lay on object is the last tool in your positioning tools. And the way it works is you select an object to manipulate. That's my little sphere. And you select a support object. And that's going to be my stretched torus there. And then you need to choose where on the support object you want to lay it onto. So just click. Okay. And the old thing, the old tool, the only manipulator had was this little ring to move it around the surface. That was it. Everything else had to be, you could offset it. That's about it. So we've added that move, rotate, scale directly in here. Now you can't move it. There's no move arrows here because it's linked to the support. So there would be no reason to have the X, Y, and Z. So that portion has been removed. You move it around the surface the same way, but your scale is built right in. So we can scale and stretch it, move it around, etc. Okay, the Z offset is still here as well, or there is now a nice little handle. Okay, 3D safe. So this is mostly going to be for those of you who have multiple licenses. You want to be able to lock your files to be able to share them to just people who have licenses you own, for example. You could also just use this to lock your files if you feel like you need to make them more secure. That way they don't get leaked out somewhere. I assume if you're not sending them anywhere, you should be fine. But just so you know how to use this in case you want to use it. That's 3D Safe in the File menu. It's really simple to use. If I click here to lock my file, it's going to lock it to my the master license, which is the one that I'm using currently to run the program. I can add any other licenses that I own, or if I'm sharing this with someone else online and I only want them to open it, just get their license number from them and just add those to the list. You can add multiple ones. It's really as simple as that. So now this is locked. When I save the file and send it out, only these 2 licenses can open it. If you have a bunch of licenses and you want to quickly add them and not have to remember the numbers and type them in, you can import or export that list. So say I've got a bunch of licenses I want to lock it to, and I can just export that. It's going to create a comma separated value, which is just a text document that lists them out, comma separated. So it'll create that for you automatically. I can save my little license file. Next time I open a file and I want to lock it to those same licenses, I don't have to type them back in, just import that list and it'll fill it in automatically. Really simple to use, but nice little way to lock your files now.